It's the third day of Darwin Mass. My voice, still trying to recover. But anyway, today I have some good news for you guys, because Santa Claus is real. He is actually real in flesh. And also he happens to be red in tooth and claw.
I'd like to flip that around and say, what are the affirmative arguments for non-belief or for atheism?
Well, I think the first one, it simply has to be, this is the way naturalism always argues. I mean, the burden of proof is sort of on the other side. Don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So the main reason for atheism is, what for? What do we need God for? Especially since we've got a surfeit of reasons for seeing why, in the absence of a God, we would nevertheless believe in God. I mean, there's plenty of natural arguments to explain why this false belief would arise. So we don't have the puzzle of, gosh, you know, where there's smoke, there's fire, where there's so much belief that God must exist. No, I think we can just set that aside. So now
as neutral.
As neutral, yeah. So that cuts no real ice here. So now the question is, if there's no positive argument for the existence of God, then we should just assume there isn't one.
There you go, folks. He's there. You can see him. And boy, is he secular. I had no idea he was so secular. Would you have thought that Santa would be that secular? Maybe it's all the forced labor that he had to do over all these years, giving presents to these naughty kids they didn't want to, or whatever it is. Anyway, let's look at what he says. What is Santa saying? So Santa's basically saying, we don't need God. We don't need God as an explanation. And the burden of proof is against, is on those people who claim that there is a God. Okay, well, a few things can be said about this. Firstly, since Dennett accepts naturalism, and he also accepts that Darwinian history of life is correct, since he accepts that, then he has to explain why natural selection has given us this belief in God and has made this belief so widespread. Because this belief, for it to be widespread, it has to be selected, and there has to be some evolutionary causes for that. So no belief can be so prevalent unless it has some sort of evolutionary benefit, or it's tied to something that had an evolutionary benefit. So you need to give us a belief about that. Also, Mr. Dennett, what you need to do is you need to explain why we no longer need to believe in God. Because if natural selection has made us believe in God, then you are now calling us to atheism. So there must be some sort of change in the environment. What change in the environment has induced you to write books like Breaking the Spell, getting people to disbelieve in God? Again, he doesn't really answer that. He doesn't realize, he doesn't realize what he's actually doing is he's actually undermining Darwinism by his evangelical atheistic stance. And this own goal is being celebrated by atheists across the world, and they don't actually realize that the more atheism spreads, the more evangelical and militant atheists are, the more they are undermining the Darwinian worldview, either from the perspective that they're showing Darwinism's faults because a belief is spreading which is supposed to be selected for, or two, that they actually are undermining what selection has actually created us for. So either way, they're between a rock and a hard place. Whoa, that was close. Anyway, well, that reminds me, you know, I had this driver in Pakistan. You know, driving is a full-time profession, so you know you can hire drivers. And the driver, you know, a lot of people have been commenting, why am I not wearing a seatbelt? Well, I should be. Been a naughty boy. No Santa for me this year. But also something funny that my driver said, I'm going to say in Urdu and then translate, because in Urdu it's actually funnier. He's talking about the seatbelt, right? So he goes, ये क्या सीट हम पहने तो गाड़ी का क्रैश हो जाए फिर हम फंस जाएंगे. What he's basically saying, look, if the car crashes and I'm wearing a seatbelt, you'll be stuck in the car. Pretty good logic there. I like that. That's very good logic. Anyway, from a Darwinian point of view, Dennett is not really giving us the entire picture. Now, another thing which I was thinking about in regards to what he said is the burden of proof. Now, is the burden of proof on the theist or the atheist? Now, this is a long discussion. Other videos of mine I've covered this, but I want to cover it from his perspective today and from a Darwinian perspective. So, if the belief in God has been put inside us by natural selection, then according to Dennett, this view is actually false. Then since this view is actually false, then natural selection can build in us false beliefs because they supposedly help us survive. Okay, then why can't that apply to your idea that the burden of proof is upon the theist? That idea is actually an idea which natural selection has come about with, because natural selection has allowed us to basically form false beliefs. Why can't that be applied to your idea? Do you see the problem here? The problem here is that selection sees no difference between true beliefs and false beliefs. All that really matters is what helps you to actually survive. So from an atheistic perspective, and I covered this recently in a lecture at Nust University, which is on my channel, is that truth is not intrinsically valuable. Truth is only instrumentally valuable. And funnily enough, I didn't see any atheists trying to challenge that, because at least with other things they can sort of muddy the waters, but this is such a clear concept that they just don't have anything to say about it. And it's very interesting. Truth has no value intrinsically, neither does falsehood. All that matters is what helps you survive. Something else I was actually thinking about is, and I have a lecture coming up in Lahore in January, inshallah, on this topic, which is Islam under the Darwinian lens. So it's sort of challenging Islam and Darwinian evolution, and looking at the sort of not challenging Islam, challenging Darwinian evolution, but looking at the sort of causes behind the sort of different perspectives that actually come around behind the belief in God and all this type of stuff. But anyway, something I was thinking about is, couldn't a Darwinist argue that militant Islamic fundamentalism is actually selected for because militant Islamic societies, conservative Islamic societies, have the most amount of children? So is it not possible that rather than what's happened to my car? Is it not possible that rather than us blaming Islam or blaming militant Muslims or blaming conservative Islamic societies, we should be blaming natural selection? Because from a Darwinian perspective, atheism should be weeded out because atheists have the least amount of children. This is well documented. So Muslims have the most amount of children in the world. So is it possible that natural selection has actually created this juggernaut of Islamic fundamentalism, which is evangelical, which is dogmatic, which is fundamentalist, because the ultimate aim is to have more children? That's quite a good argument, isn't it? I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. But I want to see how these guys can actually challenge this argument, right? How will these Darwinists challenge this argument? Well, they can challenge it by saying, no, that's not true, right? Natural selection hasn't selected Islamic fundamentalist values to become more prevalent. That's not the case at all. Okay, in that case, Darwinism is false, because Darwinism should have selected the worldview that leads to the most reproductive success. Now, if they basically bite the bullet and say, yeah, that's true, Islam is actually a purely it's the result of selection, and that's why Muslim societies are the way that they actually are. In that case, you can't really blame Muslims. You basically have to blame natural selection. Do you hear that silence? That's the sound of a Darwinist hiding under his table and crying for his mum. But guess what? You really can't refute this argument. This is actually a really watertight argument. You either have to undermine Darwinism, or you basically have to accept this sort of genetic determinism. You just have to be like, oh well, that's just the way things are, and it's an uphill struggle. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the third day of Darwin Mass. I certainly am. And I am now going to go home to increase my evolutionary fitness. I hope you guys do the same.